There you go. Floor's yours, Matt.
I'll take it away then. Good evening and welcome to all that are tuning in. As Jake was saying, I tend to spend most of my time out on the reserves, not in the office, so please do bear with me. This is the first time I've done one of these, and I'm talking to a computer screen, which makes me feel rather silly, but I shall do my best. I joined the trust. So I joined the trust as reserve officer, one of 4 reserve officers, which I'll go on to later on. Reserve officer in October 2018, so that's 3 and a bit years. Background previous to that, so I come from Essex. Don't tune out already. Come from Essex, and indeed prior to taking up the position with the North Wales Wildlife Trust, I'd done some 17 years with Essex Wildlife Trust, which stood me in good stead in many ways, and in other ways, as you can appreciate, I'm sure, a lot of the habitats up here, you don't get many of them in Essex. So it was good to learn some new habitats. I mentioned, so I'm a reserve officer. I'm one of 4 reserve officers. Myself, Rob Booth, we're in the north. We're in the west of North Wales, and then there are 2 others whom I think you've heard from one, Jordan and Paul in the east. So yes, my area is Bangor. Indeed, there are 3 reserves in Bangor. There's Ethenog, Spinneys, which I'm sure many of you are already aware of, and Knapweed, and then there's 6 also on Anglesey. So geographically, actually really quite a succinct area, especially compared to my colleagues if you were to speak to them. I am, however, fortunate enough to actually get to travel somewhat and to work on colleagues' reserves as well, for which I'm very grateful indeed. Tomorrow we've got a work party, one of the many work parties that Jake has alluded to, but we've got an away day, a busman's holiday tomorrow. We're going off down to Gwaith Powder, one of a colleague Rob Booth's reserves, to go and help with clearance of buddleia down there. The volunteers very much appreciate being able to visit other reserves, visit other volunteers, work out why they want to volunteer as well. So yes, we've got a busman's holiday tomorrow. And whilst we're on the subject of volunteering, indeed, you're very welcome to, always welcome more volunteers. If you look on the Trust's website, you'll find all about volunteering there. COVID, which everybody's still talking about, unfortunately, it stopped some of the volunteering opportunities when it was first there. So I suppose in the first year, approximately, we weren't doing a huge amount with volunteers, but as soon as possible, we got back to getting them back out, getting back out on site again. Without much ado, we will now move on to, I'll click here. No. Continue. There we go. Yeah. First of the reserves, which we'll talk about. So, Corsgoch. So, for those of you who don't know, this was the first of the bits of areas of land that the Trust actually owned and did management on. Well, as I understand it, they may well have managed areas before that, but it was the first bit that the Trust actually owned. The Trust came into existence in 1963, and Corsgoch, I believe it was 1964, when they took on this bit of land. Previous management of the land had been grazed, but it was in danger of being, well, it was put forward as an area for tipping in, so for landfill. Fortunately, it was saved from that, and indeed we've got an amazing reserve there. It's an SSSI, and basically there's 4 main habitats So we've got grassland, fen, scrub, and heath as the four main habitats, and all of which are man-made in some form. There are very few habitats within the British Isles, you could say, truly man has had no impact whatsoever. So all on Corsgoch are man-made, and as such, just because it's man-made doesn't mean to say that it's poor in terms of its wildlife. And indeed, quite often the situation is completely the opposite. Actually, it is man's intervention has actually made it more important from a wildlife point of view. Everything is trying to become, where it's not grazed, everything is trying to become woodland, whether that be wet woodland on Corsgoch or whether that be climax woodland in ancient woodland elsewhere, not of which we have on Corsgoch. Man intervenes and keeps that ecological, or stops that ecological succession from going to its climax community. So how do we manage it? I will come on to the pictures shortly. Well, basically, either we manage it, but man manages it directly himself, which indeed we do, or, because there's an awful lot involved with that, or you get graziers to do it. So animals such as sheep on there, ponies and cattle. So basically munching away and stopping things from becoming, basically going to scrub. Here's some photos, and that will prompt me as well. Right, so what are we looking at here? We're looking close, the fence line there is actually going down, looking along this central drain. So you've basically, Corsgoch in terms of topography is a very shallow valley, a broad, shallow valley. So on the sides you have some heathland, you have some grassland, some woodland, and then flowing into what this area is an area of fen that we're looking at, through which runs a central drain, which indeed you're looking at. Management thereof, if you were to look to the top left-hand corner of your screen, you will see a fire, and you'll see cut. What you're looking at there is saw sedge, an area of cut saw sedge. There's an awful lot of this species of plant in Corsgoch. A little bit is good, but that, as much as there is there, is rather too much. It's basically a case of it climbs over other stuff and outcompetes it, and it's drying out the fen area. Underneath in the fen, there's up to 3 meters plus. Some people have said up to 6 meters of peat. Now, we all know that peat is vitally important in terms of a means of storing locked up carbon, and carbon very much in terms of reducing carbon is what we're really striving to do these days. Slightly ironic that we're looking at a fire over in the corner there from what I've just said. So this, at the time of year when we're cutting, is basically September, October time is when we're cutting. The cattle will have been in there. We try and get the cattle within the fen area for as long as possible, basically until it's too wet. So again, they will be around in the fen area to probably the back end of October, as long as the weather conditions allow. And so what we're looking at here is an area of where we've cut the fence. So we've gone in with brush cutters, and then there's an army of ants that come behind the brush cutter people to take to a central place where we fire and burn there. And we don't burn directly on the ground. Several reasons for that. The main reason for that in the fen area is because it's wet. So we raise it off so we burn on tins, which are raised on bearers, so wooden bearers underneath. And this means, from the fen situation, it means that we can actually get stuff proud of the drink. Reasons elsewhere for wanting to burn on tins, as we'll talk about later on, particularly in the heathland, is basically you're stopping the heat going directly down. So yes, it's ruddy hot under that those tins there, but nowhere near as hot as it would have been were it not raised off the ground. And this will mean that the seed bank underneath should not be completely scorched. So it should be able to come back afterwards. But the main reason in the fen situation is just literally to get it proud, because actually the fire is very quick and the flash fire burn through there. So it doesn't get massively hot. What I would like to try and do at some point is to do what the traditional management of the fen, which indeed was actually to do controlled burns, to cut a fire break around said area that you would like to burn, and indeed to allow, with the right favourable wind conditions, to allow fire to actually crawl its way through the area to which you want to burn, which again actually, so whilst you're burning directly, nowhere near is the heat involved, anywhere near as hot as it would be as in taking it to a central fire. One of the things, and not necessarily in the fen we're talking about, Corsgoch, very well known for its orchids. Some 7 species, I think, in total on Corsgoch. So management done for these. And indeed, talking of cattle and grazers and timeliness of putting animals on areas, sometimes the cattle stray or are left on a little bit too long, and that means that flowering species such as the orchid you see here get munched. This can be a slight problem, but orchids are very long-lived, and as long as they're not done every year, they should come back in the following years. Now, what I can't see completely, I hope you can, is the photograph in the top right of this slide here. Now, it's slightly hidden from certainly myself here, but underneath is an otter spraint. We have otter on Corsgoch, and we're very proud of this. And on there, indeed, is an otter spraint. Very, very fishy in smell. What you were going back to the central photo, but at the side of the fence there, on the right-hand side of the fence, you will see actually that there's a bit of scrub in there. That is actually, the first one there is actually hawthorn, which is really surprising that it's actually got going out there. It's on a slight rise, so it's sufficiently dry to actually get going. But the species just beyond it is sallow, of which within the fen, there's an awful lot getting going. Mentioned beforehand about these areas want to get to their climax community. And indeed, the climax community within the fen area of Corsgoch, if left to its own devices, would be silver birch and particularly sallow, what's called car woodland, so wet woodland, which has its merits in terms of a wildlife point of view, but nowhere near as much, I would argue, as indeed keeping it as an open fen area. We don't want to remove all the sallow within the fen because it's good for supporting species such as Chetty's warbler and grasshopper warbler. So we don't want to remove the whole lot, but we don't want these little pockets sort of linking up to create larger areas of woodland. I'll move on to the next slide. I'll attempt to move on the next slide. There we go. The top left-hand photo on your screen there, you'll see, again, following a fence line, and you'll see that there's an area either side of the fence that is cut. Now, this is one of 4 main fire breaks that run crosswise through the length of the fen to stop. So basically, not the main reason they're cut, a couple of reasons why they're cut, but the main reason to cut is should there be an accidental fire that starts accidentally or indeed on purpose, then it can only go as far as the nearest water body or sort of ditch where you've starved the fire of any fuel. Hopefully the fire will stop. So we're looking at a fire break here. These are cut annually. And indeed, sometimes they're actually cut in conditions similar to what we're looking at here, which makes for interesting brush cutting. I'm sure volunteers will agree with me on this. And you can make some lovely arcs of rainbow arcs if you've inadvertently ditched the blade running in the water. So these are cut, and generally I'd like to have them cut just before October, basically before it gets to conditions such as what you're looking at there for obvious reasons. The vegetation is burnt, or so it's raked and either burnt or indeed dragged off. We do have a couple of neighbours with horses and goats who are actually quite keen on grazing or having the vegetation to actually graze their animals on, sort of a zero grazing. Lots of bulk in it, so that's a useful means of getting rid of some of it. That said, as you will see on either side of the firebreak there is an awful lot of what is. So that is this species saw sedge. For any of you who haven't met saw sedge, if you remember pampas grass, and indeed the leaves on that, which are, if you run your hand up it, if you have a hand up it, it's fine. Run back down the other edge of the leaf, then you might even cut your hand. I remember as a kid cutting my fingers on the saw edge. Now this is saw sedge. On your moving over to the right-hand side top photograph there, you're looking out across one of two water bodies within the reserve. No, you're not. That's a lie. That's a lie. I lie to you. What you're looking at appears to be a water body, but actually is the first area of fen that we cut now 3 years ago, in terms of cut and burnt, and as such it was quite a small area. So the area of which is actually appears to be underwater, that was all cut and burnt, and this photograph was taken 2 years afterwards. The ponies get in there and they love grazing the fresh regrowth from the saw sedge. By cutting it, you haven't actually killed it, of course, but you have reduced its vigour. The young regrowth is very palatable to horses and cattle. Another reason why to cut it. The cattle, well, the horses won't. The cattle will pick at the rank saw sedge. That is really very lignified and woody, is not particularly palatable. But if we've been in there beforehand and cut it, and then you get the regrowth, which is really quite lush and fresh and much less far more soft on the palate, then they'll happily graze that. And so you're slowly getting the saw sedge in that area under wraps. So this is what these areas become like, which is we want more of this throughout in a pocket mosaic type habitat throughout the fen. And indeed, we've had aerial photographs taken with a drone, and that they've been really great to look at, so we can actually see on the ground where we've actually been, and where we want to go and look at tackling for future years in order to sort of link up these areas. Again, you'll see, so your bottom left-hand corner, there you'll see a couple of volunteers having brush cut, fortunately in dry conditions, another of the fire breaks through the fen. As it comes out the other side, you will see it comes, so it's much drier, and then you get your scrub coming there. That's quite a rise that these two people are walking to. So there you have got species such as sallow, such as hawthorn, silver birch, and sycamore. Your bottom right photograph, yes, it's enough of fire, but you'll be able to see the tins, the horizontal tins, just above the ground there. So whilst it's there's heat involved. It's nowhere near as hot as it would be directly on the ground. Moving on to another. So here we're talking about, I mentioned there were 4 types of habitats. So this is, a section of heathland. And indeed there are 4 areas of heath within Corsgoch. This area that we're looking at on here, well, there's 2 areas. One is up on Bryn Golai, and another is down on Bodinch Heath. It's not all done by man with brush cutters. We do have a tractor. I think we've had about 2 years. The trust has 2 tractors. It's got one in the east, one in the west now. And indeed, the machine behind the tractor there is a Flail Collector. Now, what this does, indeed, is flails, but also collects. So, whilst it's important to cut, it is, and it's not just this whilst it's important to cut, it's also important to collect as well. Rather counterintuitively, the poorer the fertility of the soil, then the richer it is in terms of floristic value. So, following that through to its logical conclusion, that which you cut, you actually want to remove, whether that be, and then some of that will be removed if it's been grazed by animals, that is it actually locked up in the meat, so it is being removed. Of course, some is being returned in terms of the dung that's going back in, but about 2/3 of it actually goes off in the animal. So if one is cutting by hand, whether that be brush cutter, whether that be scythes, whether that be with a flail, as you see behind the tractor there, where possible and where practicable, it wants to be raked and burnt, taken, composted in an area there. So back to this machine here, that flails, that collects. And so when the hopper is full, you take it to a series of compost sites. And indeed, these compost sites are great for attracting things like grass snake in the wetter areas, which will be laying their eggs in there, and slowworm elsewhere. Common lizards love to bask on them. So very important. So you'll see the middle picture that you've got there is where basically the hoovering effect. That's one pass through with this flail here, and then the hoovering effect that it hooves everything up. One of the things you have to be very careful about, indeed, on Corsgoch, there are lots of stones, lots of rocks, lots of boulders, and the machine doesn't take too kindly to nibbling rock. Going across to going across over there to the far right, top right photo there. Again, you'll see volunteers there looking at, and indeed this isn't Bodinch Heath, actually. This one is actually on Castach, where the heath, to call it heath is really stretching it quite a bit. It's heath in that, yes, there's gorse there, but it isn't heath in that there's much by way of heather. Unfortunately, we've lost most of it, of the heather in here. It is hanging on in areas, but it has been smothered somewhat by the gorse. Gorse is really quite invasive. It's great for wildlife, but it is very good at taking over these areas. Just moving on to another slide. Carpenny clip. Now, Carpenny clip is a series of 3 fields. It's quite a small, it's a very small reserve on the edge of Menai Bridge. And it consists of 3 fields which are surrounded by hedges and scrub. And indeed, it's being invaded somewhat by this scrub, not least because we've not now had it being grazed for about 5 years, possibly 6 years. There were a couple of ponies that were grazing it and keeping the scrub somewhat under wraps, but it has been somewhat invaded. And indeed, what I did do last year was indeed use that flail, that collector flail on the tractor, and hoover up quite a lot of the bramble that have been invading. There's a wet area in there, which indeed is very good for snipe at this time of year. And indeed, as we'll go on later on, there's quite a big ash dieback problem. But we'll move to the next photograph, if I can find more.
Use the arrows.
Oh, use the arrows. I'll use the arrows. That one. No, not that one. That one. That one. Right. Penny clip. So the biggest photo, the photo on the left, which has been obscured somewhat by the one in the middle, there you'll see what you're looking at is grassland, and what you're looking at is actually the seed heads of a load of knapweed. It is really very important, or one of the species that is very important on the reserves here is knapweed. It's a great nectaring, a late year nectaring plant for insects, and there's a lovely lot here, and indeed you'll probably see in the centre of the photo there's the odd bit of ragwort as well. I'll go backwards slightly on ragwort. I'll talk about Korsgach. Indeed, that's one of we do manage the or some of the pernicious weeds, so-called, on these areas that are grazed. So here we're looking at Kaipenniclip, elsewhere Korsgach, as we'll come on to later on, Ithinog as well. So by pernicious weeds, what do I mean? Well, basically weeds which, basically spread very quickly into other areas and can be problematic. So with good neighbourliness, one is supposed to look after the pernicious weeds, or keep under wraps the pernicious weeds on your site so that they aren't spreading to neighbouring areas. On Korsgach, what we cut or what we pull there, we employ various different means, are ragwort, creeping thistle, and in some places broadleaf dock, all of which, incidentally, are wonderful for wildlife. So it's quite ironic, really. Other species which people loathe, or quite often loathe in their gardens and things. I mean, bramble, brilliant for wildlife. Ivy, brilliant for wildlife. So all these bad species, or the gardener doesn't want, tend to be really rather good for wildlife. Nettles, people tend to swear about nettles in their garden, but very good for wildlife. So, and indeed, you will see the use of, as anybody got, and they can bring to them us their used dump sacks, building dump sacks, very useful from our point of view. In the end, we do, in terms of dragging them around, we do make holes in the bottom of them, but they are very useful. The other two photos, and I think for this it's the only couple of photos that's on the Kaipenniclip here. They're looking at, oh, I'll go backwards. I'll apologise. What am I doing? I do. There are two slides. Apologise. No, indeed. What are we looking at there? We're looking at a dead hedge in the central photo there, where indeed we have, that was almost completely made up of ash down this hedge line here, and unfortunately it had been quite advanced stages of ash dieback, which I'm sure many of you will have heard of. This, and indeed, so here it was necessary to fell it because it's up the side of a footpath. And you see the two photos there, two hits at it, and then by the end, by the photo on the right-hand corner, the bottom right-hand corner there, they've all gone. Yes, this is probably quite a useful place to talk about ash dieback. It is a big problem, as I'm sure you're well aware, and it's basically the next, or not the next. It is having as much detriment as indeed Dutch elm disease had in the back end of the 60s and through the 70s. People may also have heard of acute oak decline, which indeed people were very concerned about around about 15, 20 years ago. But this actually has proved to be nowhere near as devastating a problem as ash dieback, which is meaning that we are losing an awful lot of ash from our hedgerows, indeed from our woodlands. What happens to it? Well, it dies from the top down and it becomes very brittle, which for those of you who know a nice healthy ash, this is rather strange because I mean typically it was used in handles, tool handles. It's very springy. It's very springy when it's healthy, but ash dieback causes it to become very brittle and indeed really quite dangerous. And tree surgeons have nicknamed it the widowmaker because indeed, unfortunately, some have have really come a cropper in working in these trees. Now, it dies from the top down, so it pays, I suggest, and once the tree's got it, there's very little evidence that they can actually come back from it. They will struggle for a couple of years and put out fresh lammus growth, which people will see. This lammus growth will come down and down and down the tree. Signs for it are if the leaves happen to be on the trees, then it's a black curling of the leaves, and you can see black lesions on the twigs and on the bark. On the young on the young wood, I liken it will go a purpley colour and then orange on the stems. Now, ash typically is a greeny grey, a healthy green grey, but a purpling underneath the bark is really indicative of having ash dieback there. It looks similar to when old people bruise and bleed under the skin. That's what I liken it to. So it dies from the top down. On that basis, you're reducing the longer you leave it, your number of options for actually dealing with the tree are reduced because, as I mentioned, it becomes very brittle or fragile to actually climb and do stuff with. And so in the end, you're just left with, I can fell it from the base, which might well mean that there's various things within the target area. Moving on to stepping with ash dieback. On Anglesey, I think even more so than other parts of North Wales, it appears to be that much more prevalent. I'm not sure it is. It's just a case of Anglesey itself doesn't have much by way of woodland, really. That which it has tend to be in hedgerows, and the vast majority of the trees within hedgerows are either ash or sycamore. So it appears that it will. I think particularly on Anglesey, it will make a massive impact, into a visual impact. Moving on to the next slide. No, I will. There we go. That's to prove that I did actually do some. What have I employed it in there? Bracken has been really quite invasive on the Kaya penny clip. This is again a Kaya penny clip. So hoovering up the bracken, this machine was used for when was it? The back end of late spring, just to see what it did last year. We were trialing it, and then the bottom photo you've got there, you can see what it's done to some really quite tall bramble. I don't mean late spring at all. You'll see from there that it was the very back end of summer. Sorry. Moving on. Kemlin. Those of you who know or don't know Kemlin, so it's up near directions. It's up very close to Wilford Power Station. So on Anglesey there, up in the north there, and it's mainly known for its sandwich tern colony. There are common terns that nest there as well, and indeed Arctic tern. It is wardened each year. We warden it between April and September, and indeed this is when basically the reserve really looks after itself. But in preparing it for the wardens there, that's when work gets going on there. Not least devegetating the islands so that the sandwich terns find it easy to nest. That said, the sandwich terns don't really mind the vegetation there, but the other species of terns do. The main reason for actually taking the vegetation off from the sandwich tern colonies there is so they can actually, the lookers can actually see in and see what numbers are actually there. Other things that need doing there, electric fence needs to be put out around the islands to stop terrestrial predators such as otter. Again, we've got otter there, and fox, which indeed might swim out as well. Let's find some photos because that might prompt me. Yeah, so looking at the larger of two islands, and indeed that's where it's on this island that the majority of the sandwich terns set up. So we're looking at it from the shingle bank from the seaward side, looking back inland, and indeed this shingle bank here probably will be overtopped within about the next 50 years, and so we'll lose these islands quite probably in that time. In the meantime, so we need to look at potentially retreating further inland. So coastal rise, sea level rise is having quite an impact on several of my reserves, Spinneys, that we'll come on to later, and indeed Namporth is having some detrimental damage there. Have I another? No, we'll go back to there. Staying with Kemlyn, yeah, so this is I mentioned the lagoon area here. That will probably, they'll go through the shingle bank, and it will probably within the next 50 years, and that will be inundated in all probability. So wardened between April and September, and indeed it also, other things that involves is putting up a rope fence along the shingle bank to keep the public with their dogs away from the lagoon area. It is so throughout this time, it is wardened, and indeed most of the public are very understanding in what's going on, of what is going on, but roping the area off is important, and it's to do that. It's quite a long way through. I believe it's about for up to 500, 600 meters across. So all the posts have to be taken out there. So it's a very useful thing to involve. What we have done in the past is involve the university students, young and willing, to go and traipse the posts out and the rope. Moving on again, Cape Porthamel. Not many of you, I would have thought, know of, or have been to Cape Porthamel, and indeed, unfortunately, Cape Porthamel currently is not open to the public, although I would like to see if we can actually change that. Why isn't it open to the public? Well, it was, or it is, an old quarry which was tipped in the 1970s and 80s, and indeed, actually, if you go looking through the stuff within it, there's not actually much by of plastic, which is really good. There are lots of bottles, and indeed there's in one area there's a real chrome, as in a thick chrome car bumper sticking out of the ground. It was capped, but not very well. So, which is why indeed there's an awful lot of the rubbish has come to the surface. After it was dumped in, it was just left, and basically it's reverted to secondary woodland. And it's really quite an interesting study in just what nature will do if you allow it to just take things back. Within it, there is also an area of grassland, which we maintain and making on year, we we push the woodland back a little bit to enlarge this area of grassland, which indeed is very sheltered, is very good for invertebrates. You want to see some pictures, right? Purple thermal. Were you to go in there now, you'd see up the top end a lovely lot of snowdrops. Again, so very much, I know they all are, but they're very much a garden escapee. That said, it's lovely to see them. Part of the thing, there are various strange garden plants growing in there, as you might expect from it having been a tip. But again, it's still really quite interesting. They will be coming through. I mean, this photo wasn't taken recently, but it was a bit later on in the year. The photo on the bottom in the middle. There we're looking at a load of wild garlic. There's carpets of the stuff through there, so you can see it poking through the ground. You know, this time of year it's coming through, and this photo was taken a little bit later in the year. There's a centre, and indeed in the same said photograph, you can see remnants of a fire. Surprise, surprise, and indeed work party sat around the remnants of a fire. This area, it's the bottom of the quarry, and it is seasonally wet. What we've done over in here over the last few years is open up around the woodland around it. And indeed, we've got rid of an awful lot of the woody material that has fallen into it over the years. It is only winter wet, or winter and autumn wet, so unfortunately it doesn't hold water all year round, but it supplies more interest. So there is now a winter wet pond, an area of grassland, and otherwise woodland. Going back to Ash Dieback, and the two other photos that you have there, those trees that you'll see there indeed are all ash, and indeed for the sharp-eyed amongst you, you will see King Alfred's buns on the side of the stem there, this black fungi, which indeed is indicative to ash and grows on very little else. And they, just like if you cut a cross-section through a lump of timber, so too if you were to cut through King Alfred's bun, you'll see his concentric rings, which indeed can be used again to age, likewise with the timber, but also the fungi itself as well. I'm not sure it correlates to one ring per year. But going back to these ash trees here, quite a few of them I've recently got felled, or felled because they're at the top, right at the top of the quarry bank there. And if we are to try and encourage the public to go in, or allow, I don't think we need to encourage public to come in. People quite happily go in. Then obviously these hazards need to be dealt with. Moving on, Bithinog. Swig. Apologies. Bithinog. Now, this was an area, if only I'd known it, I in a former life, I attended Bangor Uni, and went and did a BSc in agroforestry, and if only I'd known it, indeed I was at Halls in Reichel, Nieuwit Reichel, which is along Frivoith Road. At the top of Frivoith Road was, and indeed the trust had just taken it on by then, there's a reserve at the top, Bithinog. Now this, indeed, the history to this was saved from being built on. It was threatened to be built on in the late 1980s. And fortunately, it was rescued from that by several individuals, basically saying it's great for fungi. Basically, it's an exercise. It's great from a floristic point of view, but particularly it's very good from a fungi point of view. So the mycologists got out there and said, no, you can't possibly build on it, with the result that it was saved, and indeed it is an SSSI. It is an SSSI for its fungi, not for its floristic value, although that said it is good, but actually for its fungi. Now this consists of 5 fields which are surrounded by hedges and woodland, and we graze it throughout the year. So it's a very extensive grazing. Intensive is lots of animals, but we graze all areas where we do graze. They are grazed very extensively. So it's a small number of head on quite a large area. So this is grazed throughout the year on a rotational basis by up to 6 cattle. And for those of you who know the site, because it is it's very much an urban site surrounded by a lot of homes, therefore there's a lot of dogs. As you can imagine, there's an awful lot of dog mess, unfortunately, as well. This means that the grazier will graze with steers, with bullocks, but not with heifers. And certainly not with heifers that they want to ever take calves from, because there's a problem with dog feces and fertility. Let's see some pictures. Yeah, there you can see there's staying on the grazes. So here is a belted Galloway. Now within the trust, this is similar for in the east as well. We like to support rare breeds or older breeds. Now, yes, it's nice to keep the breeds alive, but the primary reason for this is the fact that they actually eat scrub. They eat the things that you want to eat. Whereas if you were, for instance, if you were to put certainly on Korsgoch on that source edge, if you were to put commercial breeds, if you were to put Friesians on there, for instance, or Ayrshires, or indeed Limousin or anything like that, apart from the fact they're too heavy, the Limousin, they just turn their nose up at what they're being expected to eat. Not so bad when you're on a thin hog. There's nice green grass on a thin hog, but in Korsgoch, certainly commercial breeds would turn their nose up at what they're expected to eat in terms of the sausage, the sallow, the birch. So here we're looking at a belted Galloway. We also have the grazier that we use. Indeed, she has also got Highland cattle as well, all of which look really quite impressive. Elsewhere, you'll see a boardwalk. This area gets very wet at this time of year. Indeed, came through there just today, and it was good to be able to use the boardwalk. This is the area, the reserve here is Kai Glebe, which basically means wet field. Other stuff that we're doing here, and indeed the photograph in the bottom right-hand corner you've got there is looking through Kai Glebe, and you can see there the rush. So again, denoting the fact it's really quite a wet field. The photograph in the top right, there again you'll see volunteers hard at work making a dead hedge. We have coppiced the area there of very leggy blackthorn, and indeed we don't burn it. We don't burn everything, but we like to use, where possible, especially with the scrub species, sticking it into a dead hedge. That said, if you were to stick sallow, having cut it into a dead hedge in an awful lot of the areas within the fen on Korsgoch, then it would just reroot and off it go again. Talking about scrub, and indeed where we wanted to come back as coppice, where here we're looking at on a thin hog, but equally it could be on any reserve. Then of course you just cut it and it comes in the autumn, in the winter, and it comes back again in the spring. But in many areas we do actually want to get rid of the scrub. Thinking now of Korsgoch, I've mentioned about the sallow within the fen, the sallow and the birch within the fen there. Now what we do there is stump treat, because we don't actually want it coming back. So what we use there is indeed glyphosate, which we paint directly onto the cut stumps. What else can I tell you about Ethenog? Oh, again, talking about the pernicious weeds here. So that which we pull or pull and indeed cut on Ethenog. So in the back end of the summer, the thistle, the creeping thistle. We leave the marsh thistle. We take the creeping thistle. The creeping thistle indeed does spread by both sexually and asexually. So the creeping thistle will indeed creep through on rootstock through the ground. So that's more of a problem than the marsh thistle. So we cut or we pull the creeping thistle and indeed the ragwort. And on the ragwort on Ethenog is quite a, we pull twice all through the fields. And I think year on year it's slowly depleting. At least that's what I tell the volunteers. Moving on. Marion Doris. Now I think if I had to say which was my favourite reserve, I would be hard put to decide between Korsgaard and Marion Doris, but I think actually Marion Doris would actually win out, just about. It's a lovely, fabulous site. It's got some excellent views back into Snowdonia, but it's a wonderful site. What have I got on more Marion Doris? This indeed is an SSSI as well, and in terms of management of it, there is such a thing. As an SSSI, NRW, NRW, Natural Reserves.
Sources.
Right.
Resources Wales.
Natural Resources Wales. Thank you very much. I've been prompted on this. Natural Resources Wales is NRW. If a site is designated an SSSI, Natural Resources Wales actually gets involved, and through being involved, it basically needs to ensure that in some way it is actually kept as an SSSI and stays in good condition. Now, to that end, they will help monetarily in terms of work on it in order to achieve that work is done, whether that be done by contractors or whether that be done actually in-house. Korsgaard is currently under a Section 16, which these are, and so is Ethenog, both as so SSSIs. They have Section 16 status. The Marion Doris did have, but it ran its ran its years, and it popped out at the end. I'm hoping to get it back again under management, which will mean. It doesn't mean that we're not doing any work there. Far from it, we're doing an awful lot of work there. But it does mean that we might actually, NRW might give us some money for doing this work there. So it is a heathland, which indeed, like heathland on Korsgaard, has been massively invaded by gorse and scrub. And it has been, lots of it has returned, well, on the edges of it have returned to what you might call early secondary woodland. So it's a case of, again, a very much a man-made habitat, but as such we want to keep it as heathland and stop it reverting to secondary woodland, or not reverting, going to secondary woodland. Photographs. Right. So what we have here, very industrious. Red hedge, you'll see on your top left there, with silver birch. So again, we don't burn everything, and indeed, we find dead hedges are a very good means of organising the dead material, but having it in such a way that it's actually A, aesthetically pleasing, but B, rather more importantly, it's a good habitat in its own right, and C is a means of actually usefully getting rid of material or organising material and have it rotting down slowly. So that silver birch, you can see that we're cutting down now. The photograph below, indeed, you can see yet another fire. Again, you can see the employment of the tins, and very much there, and indeed you'll see that they're raised off the ground. So they're on quite large timbers, just cut from materials that we actually wanted to get rid of anyway. And so here we are, the reason for not burning directly on the ground, yeah, we're not worried about it getting inundated by water, but what we really are concerned about here, because we're talking rather more heat involved with the material that you're burning up, you don't want that heat directly going down and destroying the seed bank below. Going to your top right, then here indeed we have a really rather nice quarry area, which is part of the reserve. Now this, there has been peregrine through here, and indeed not this one, but a neighbouring quarry, a bit slightly larger. Peregrine do actually nest, so it's within the realms of possibility that we might one year actually get peregrines nesting in the quarry. Very much invaded this quarry by ash. There's a lovely lot of elm within it as well, actually. We don't want to take it all out, but it has got a grassy area within it, which we cut half one year and half the next year. So it's cut biannually and maintained as grassland through there, but allowed to go through the winter. Good for the invertebrates, so not to cut everything all at the same time. And indeed, the bottom photograph there, you'll see really quite, well, evidence of what is really quite tall, solid, or what appears to be solid, but an awful lot of gorse. Underneath that, I assure you, and climbing through it as well, are heathers. There's both bell and ling heather there, but they really are struggling. So what we do on this reserve here, so yes, you're cutting your paths annually through them, which are wonderful, but equally cutting areas of the gorse, and treating stump treating as much as is possible. That said, there's a huge amount of seed through there, and you're always going to miss some stumps anyway. But it's you're keeping it under wraps. Making way for, hopefully, my target this year is to ensure that the fencing all around it is intact, and to get grazes back on it again. Again, it is not an area that hasn't been grazed for 5 or 6 years. The cattle will eat the young gorse quite happily, but the older gorse less keen on it. So again, if you can get young, fresh vegetation, then graziers will scoff it. Just as a small aside, you will appreciate, I think, from the photograph and the bottom left there, we're appreciating the steepness of the side, and therefore possibly you're looking down towards the Clean Peninsula there. So it'll give you some idea of the fact that on a good day, I mean, the views back into Snowdown and onto Clean are phenomenal. Let's move to another. Paul. Another favourite of reserve of mine. Now, this is an SSSI woodland designated. It's along the Menai Strait. Indeed, it's notable for a species of whitebeam, which is indeed itself threatened a bit by sea level rise, because this one, it seems to favour further down the slope, and indeed actually right at the bottom on the beach area, or where it goes up from. And if you were to walk along the Menai Strait, you will see where it's the sea has undercut considerably the reserve there, or the land there. So another reserve that's really quite threatened by global warming, sea level rise. Great for its aconites later on, wood anemones, aconites later on in the spring. Let's see if we can get some photographs. Here we go. Yes, so along the first one, the top left, you'll see we're looking along the Menai Strait there, and unfortunately it's obscured a bit by the the next photograph, but there's really quite a cliff effect. So rather than the reserve or the land slipping into the sea, onto the beach there really is quite a cliff, which has been created by the fact that the sea level is coming up, or the tidal effect, the wave action on the reserve, not least the wave action by another problem of there is more waves in there by these outboard ribs that tear us up and down there during the summer. But we can't say the problem is all down to them. Other photographs. What have we here? We have, and indeed on it there's a central path which goes through the middle, longitudinally through the reserve, and if you were to walk through it, you can appreciate it really is quite steep, slipping in. So 40, 50, 55 degree in some places angle, which means that we have to keep an eye on the trees, which are particularly those which are on the higher side of the slope. What we're looking at on the photograph of the bottom two photographs of the one on the right is indeed of beach. I did take other photographs that I didn't put in, but you could actually see that the root plate had heaved, and I think you can appreciate from the angle that the tree has how the tree is at, how it would heave. If you were to go back to the left, you'll see where indeed said beech is down the hill there. Now it will probably come back again as coppice, but yeah, basically they get to a certain height and weight, and then the action of the slope is there's not much soil there, and the slope is that steep that unfortunately they need to be taken out. Underneath, there's a nice stand throughout the woodland. There's a nice understory of hazel and elm, and what we're trying to do is encourage more of this by indeed taking out some of the canopy trees. Now, typically in there, in terms of those which we've taken out, are the sycamore and ash. Now, quite a lot of the ash indeed has been taken out from a health and safety point of view, but that's had the the intention was that actually some of the ash would be opened up there, regardless of whether it was ash dieback or not, because the intention is to open up the understory. So for a lovely lot of hazel in there and elm. To the top right corner, you will see a big pile of debris there. Indeed, that is another lot of ash, which indeed is just fell to waste. And on a site like this, it really is a case of felling to waste, because you would not be able to extract it were it not by helicopter, quite literally. That said, you've got a lovely lot of dead wood rotting away. Dead wood on reserves or on any area is vitally important, whether that be lying on the ground, as indeed this situation here, or indeed standing dead timber as well. That said, for obvious reasons, where it's close to a path, we can't leave standing dead wood. But if it's away from where it's not going to fall on the path and people aren't walking underneath, then it's great to leave it. A vitally important habitat to have. Move on. Another one here. Porth Diana. We're getting there. Rock rose is what this one is important for. And indeed, it is, I believe, one of about only 4. And then spotted rock rose is Innis Mons, so it's Anglesey's national flower. And as such, Porth Diana is one of, I think, only 4 sites on Anglesey where you find it. Other places where it's found indeed on the Scilly Isles, I believe, and down in Spain. But we have it on Porth Diana, and I hope to have a picture of it for you. I can't remember. It's not on there. But yeah, sorry, I don't have a photograph of a spotted rock rose for you. But what I do have there, it's very much a rugged site it's in Triada Bay. There's a lot of you'll find you'll find no trees actually on the reserve. What you will find is invasion of course, but such is the impact of the proximity to the sea there. The salt spray, I remember going there one year after a sea storm, and the gorse, a lot of the gorse was brown, and it looked as if indeed it had actually been sprayed. Now, it hadn't been sprayed in terms of a herbicide, but it had been sprayed by the salt air. So possibly this is a means of, if one were to spray salt water, perhaps that's a biological way of actually managing gorse elsewhere. The gorse on the reserve again needs keeping under control on the upland bit there, because it is encroaching upon these little areas of grass and incredibly thin soils that you've got here. But you get very fine grassland, and within this closely cropped grassland, which indeed in a lot of areas is managed by grazers. The grazers there would be rabbits. Rabbits are a great form of management. You don't have to fence them in. Quite often, indeed, in places you have to fence them out, but you don't have to feed them because you don't have to look after them. So they are a great management tool. But we want these fine grassland areas. That's where we find the spotted rock rose. For those of you that know the site, you'll know that it's surrounded by a lot of caravans and homes. One of the species that people unfortunately like to plant because it's pretty, in their hedges is Rosa rugosa. Which yes, whilst it looks a bit quite pretty, it is very invasive, and indeed it spreads very happily into areas where you don't want it. Not least on one particular edge on the reserve here at Porth Diana. So one of the jobs that we have to do there is cut it. Indeed, we do cut and rake it 2 times in a year, just to reduce its vigor. We don't spray for it, we don't stump treat for it, but we do over the years. Its vigor is being reduced just by cutting and raking. And on to the next one, spinnies, and I think we may be getting there. Spinnies, and indeed this is another one which is threatened by sea level rise. Very small reserve, very important for birders. Birders like the spinnies because you get all sorts of rarities dropping in, whenever you go down there, it seems to be whenever you go down there, you meet someone there who's desperate to photograph kingfisher, and indeed it's one of the places where you can really fairly assured if you sit there long enough of a day, then you will get kingfisher. There are some fabulous shots of kingfisher which indeed have been taken from spinnies. This is a lagoon area, and I'll just find the photographs. Yeah, so a series of 3 lagoons created by man. Now, this was possibly created as a the route of the Ogwen Valley, possibly in the past was changed slightly, and this may be. One thought is that it may have been the result of some of the engineering works they did in order to actually move the route of the Ogwen. I'm not sure, but so it's a series of saline lagoons, because indeed it is linked to the estuary, to the strait there, and indeed you will see, you're looking at the bottom there, you look at the sluice, blocked. Surprise, surprise. I'll come on to that. But a series of 3 saline lagoons, and indeed which have islands within them, which we're looking out at. Mentioned it's very important for birds. So indeed, the top left-hand one there, you're looking at a load of little egret. On that there, there's reed on the islands there. The thing that limits the amount of reed within there, a couple of things really. A, the depth of the water. It can't grow in too deep water, and B, the salinity of that water. But these, yeah, so these reeds need managing slightly. So the top right-hand corner, you'll see a volunteer there, Bass, fork in hand, indeed. So the area of reed just behind has been cut with brush cutter, and so again cut and raked, and so taken above, push back into the scrub above the tide line, so to speak. Going down to the bottom right-hand corner, you will see some youngsters there employed. It was we had a wonderful day doing this here. There was a big silt bank in front of the estuary hide, and the reserve has 3 hides, but the estuary hide had a big bank of silt in front of it, which was built up, and it was felt that we needed to remove this. So where's your willing volunteers? These indeed are secondary school kids here. And good employment of pallets. Pallets great for spreading the weight, and good employment of dump sacks. You'll see there. I mentioned dump sacks earlier on. Anybody got any dump sacks? Moving back round to look at our sluice. Why did I take a photograph of this? This is to annotate, put to the fore the fact that sea level rise is a bit of a problem here. Now, the beach is being reprofiled over the years, or nature is reprofiling it. It's making it very, very steep compared to what I understand it used to be, throwing stones up, and indeed throwing stones into the channel where the sluice is at the end of, and periodically blocking it, which basically means once or twice a month on the high tides. Occasionally, as indeed in this situation, I didn't show you where it was possible to you get the core, it's starting to block, so you go down there with your shovel and you dig it out by hand. However, far more often than not, it's all been chucked in there, and indeed often you can't actually see that there is a sluice there at all. The beach is thrown all the way up into that hole there, and the beach just appears as a continuous uniform level or line gradient. Moving on. There we go. We're getting to the end. So here is a all that you need to know, or you need to click on to the links in order to become a member, and with the free newsletter. Suffice to say, indeed, I'll put it at the beginning of my talk, and I've completely glossed over it. If it weren't for the volunteers, and they've been absolutely phenomenal, especially sticking with us throughout COVID, and indeed bearing with us when we're saying, unfortunately, you can't come out. Sorry, they've come back. And if it weren't for the volunteers, then, well, I think it's suffice to say, if there weren't for the volunteers, the trust wouldn't exist. So for any of you out there who are thinking of having got some free time and you'd like to dedicate it to a well-meaning organisation, things like that, then feel free to get in touch. New volunteers always welcomed. And I think that's about the list, the end of what I've got. Thanks for bearing with me.